Madam Web is being panned by just about everybody unfortunate enough to have seen the film. The film itself is a living meme, being called the Room of comic cinema, and is very clearly on pace to set the genre back a few decades. But the writing has been on the wall for Sony's Spider-Man-less Spider-Universe since its inception. Originally, this video was going to discuss how Sony is working overtime to attempt to blur the lines between the actual MCU and Sony's sucktacular Spider-Man-less Spider-Verse. However, another prominent YouTuber made an extremely similar video and I did not want to rain on their parade, so we pivot and well, today's video is going to be about how Sony is cannibalizing Spider-Man properties, and that just sucks for everybody. I mean, we really need to discuss just what the hell is going on over at Sony and what their actual endgame is. No, not that endgame, which was awesome. This endgame, boy, the Sweeneyverse, Madam Web 2, when, fellas, am I right? No, just kidding. Please don't ever make a sequel to this film. Madam Web is basically dog shit, we all get that. I haven't talked to anybody with 2 functioning brain cells who saw the movie and said, boy, I'm glad I spent money and time on this. The film was so abhorrent that Dakota Johnson, Madam Web herself, fired her agents after the first trailer dropped for the film. She also publicly stated that she hasn't seen the film and probably never will. And this is extremely problematic for the MCU, but specifically for Spider-Man. And to best explain why, I want to take you on a brief history tour through the last 20 years of modern Spider comics cinema. In 2002, Spider-Man was king of the box office. Sam Raimi, along with Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, made back-to-back bangers, with Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 being considered as 2 of the best superhero films of all time. They were pretty much instrumental in reshaping comic cinema and modern superhero blockbusters at the same time. Spider-Man 3 had some issues but still made more money than God, and after Sam Raimi dropped off literal dump trucks of cash at Sony Studios, he ended up exiting the franchise and Sony retired that version of Spider-Man. 5 years later, they rebooted the franchise with Tobey gone, Andrew Garfield in, and based the new universe a bit more off the Ultimate Spider-Man universe. However, these films didn't quite resonate with audiences the way that the previous trilogy had. And honestly, despite audiences loving the dynamic between Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker and Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy, we had a pretty lackluster starting point, followed up by The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a film that basically stopped the franchise dead in its tracks. Sony canceled all plans for future Spider-Man films. But they were all deceived, for in secret, Sony forged another pact. By this point, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was absolutely cooking and had recently wrapped up Phase 2. The MCU was the smog of cinema, just a lumbering dragon sitting on top of a mountain of gold. Everything they put out did well, and they were pretty much viewed to be unstoppable at the time. So imagine how hype it was when, starting in Marvel's MCU Phase 3, Sony and Marvel came to an agreement that Marvel could openly use and make Spider-Man films and include Spider-Man in the MCU. And while that is awesome, this is also where things get really weird. Sony became the jealous girlfriend of comic cinema, just horribly catty and desperate to make Marvel know how much they didn't actually need Spider-Man. But times were different back then. Basically every superhero film that came out at this time, whether it be Marvel, DC, or films like Sony's Venom, were doing extremely well due to the ongoing popularity of the MCU. In fact, Sony's first standalone Spider-Man adjacent film, Venom, made $850 million. The Venom blueprint then became the game plan for all the upcoming slate of films that Sony was about to bombard general audiences with. However, it's my general opinion that Venom did well because the character in both the comics and cinema was viewed as an anti-hero, a stark contrast to the MCU's more morally clean-cut heroes. Venom bit people's heads off and swore a ton. The film did well financially, but people questioned Venom's Spider-Man-less origin and a complete disassociation from the character's roots. But too late, Sony read the writing on the wall. They decided they want to have their cake and eat it too. They immediately greenlit solo movies for every Spider-Man character they possibly could, desperately trying to put these characters into the exact same mold that they already had. While Sony worked behind the scenes to get this Spider-Man-less anti-hero verse off the ground, they were also simultaneously reaping the rewards of Spider-Man printing money in the actual MCU. See, Sony thought they understood the MCU and the success they were having, and much like a hair metal guitarist in the 80s, Sony thought the good times would basically never end. Fans wanted to see Spider-Man interact with the Avengers, the MCU's largest cash cow, and they got it. They also got a solo film, a team-up movie, a death, very sad, a rebirth, yay, another solo film, actual poop, and one of the most talked about team-up movies ever featuring all 3 silver screen Spider-Man. Oh, and that last one made over $1 billion. But slowly, audiences began to stop caring as much about the MCU. As critics slowly began to turn on the lackluster product Marvel released post-Endgame, they came at Sony's films even harder. First was the sequel to Venom, Let There Be Carnage. The poor reviews mixed with a general swindling quality across the board and some generalized superhero fatigue caused this film to earn roughly 60% of what the original had. It was still the 7th highest grossing film of the year, so of course Sony said, "F it, let's make a third one," which they're doing right now. But now, the writing was kind of on the wall. Sony could not stop themselves from making anything and everything Spider-Man adjacent that they had already announced. They had gotten so brazen with their films that they began to incorporate elements of the actual MCU into them. Next up was Oscar-winning film Morbius, a film so bad that its contributions to the meme community are legendary. Morbius is, generally speaking, an awful film that no man, woman, or child should have ever been forced to see. It was panned by critics, audiences, and its post-credit scene linking it to a version of the Vulture from the MCU was truly next-level cringe. He actually says, "I think we should team up." But again, I don't feel like anybody really expected Morbius to be that good of a film. At this point, audiences were kind of hip to what was going on. But then, from the 7th layer of hell, crawled Sony's most recent cinematic monstrosity, Madam Web. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, when this film was announced, I was kind of hyped, and I know what you're thinking, that is an insane thing, why were you excited about this? I'll tell you why, because I had managed to convince myself that Madam Web was a code name for a Spider-Woman film, and when I saw Dakota Johnson cast, I was like, they're absolutely going to have it be like, it's definitely going to be Spider-Woman, look at her, she could easily play Spider-Woman, right? Am I right? But it wasn't. And kudos to Sony, though, for having the balls to make this monstrosity. They actually lied to the entire cast and tricked them into believing that they were going to be in the MCU, something that Sydney Sweeney and Dakota Johnson all but confirmed recently. I just think it's a little messed up that they were lied to. Like, yeah, they're actresses, they're millionaires, we shouldn't feel sorry for them at all, but like, I do feel sorry if you're not super hip to that stuff. Maybe it was really easy to dupe these actresses into thinking they were in the MCU, and that sucks. But Sony could not stop sabotaging Spider-Man properties because the unreleased Kraven is virtually the exact same film as Venom. They're taking a classic, well-fleshed-out character, Kraven the Hunter, and bastardizing him into some weird anti-hero. Also, the trailer is actually hilarious because a drop of lion's blood enters his bloodstream and he becomes like Lion Man. Lion Man, does whatever a lion can. Can he make $1 billion? No, he can't, cause this movie sucks. Additionally, it's worth noting that it looks like the entire story of the Kraven the Hunter film seems to be plagiarized from the Cats in the Cradle story of Catman and Gail Simone's run of Secret Six. Like, literally, there are dozens of Twitter threads about this. Kraven is just Catman, but sexier. It just seems like nobody at Sony has thought out the long-term ramifications of systematically destroying their entire catalog of spider villains. In a desperate attempt to replicate the success of the first Venom film, they're throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. Kraven is gonna suck, as bad or worse than Madam Web, and when it comes out and it bombs, Sony doesn't seem like they're gonna learn anything at all from that. They're just gonna pick a new character, like Green Goblin, Rhino, or Big Wheel, and they'll make a standalone film about them as an anti-hero, because I can imagine it now. Jackson Wheel was a simple businessman who was pushed too far. He lost it all, and now all he has left is a single shot to put it back together in a giant wheel thing that he'll save New York in. Wait, what the hell am I doing? Somebody at Sony might be writing this down and actually greenlight this project. That joke took me 8 seconds to write, and I can guarantee you that is longer than it took an entire writer's room of people to put together the Madam Web script. And sure, I know that for the majority of this film, I have skipped over the Miles Morales suite of films that they've made, and that's because those are universally praised, but that isn't Sony. That's Lord & Miller that's doing those. The only way to stop Sony from continuing to cannibalize Spider-Man villains from horrible standalone films is to be firm. Just stop going. Stop retweeting the memes. Don't watch the trailers. Ignore the entire universe. Sony can't weather an endless storm of financial failures. They're trying to make a Hypno Hustler film, people. Hypno Hustler. Come on. I truly think that if the MCU had completely unrestricted access to Spider-Man's pantheon of villains, we probably would have gotten far better sequels to the MCU Spider-Man films, and those characters could have shown up in other films where they're also closely tied to other heroes. The fourth installment of the Spider-Man franchise under the MCU banner also has to be good, because if not, audiences are going to check out left and right. Sony clearly does not respect the characters they have the rights to. I don't think anybody could effectively argue that they do. How could they respect them when they're making stuff like this? But casual audiences are the majority of viewership for these franchises. You and I, we know these films aren't in the MCU, but a middle-aged couple might not. And watching something like Madam Web in theaters might make them think twice about any future MCU or Spider-Man project that isn't directly controlled by Marvel. And that's the point. Sony has to stop cannibalizing comic cinema for a quick buck, because much like hair metal, the party will die faster than you think. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you agree with some of the points, and if you didn't, feel free to leave me a comment down below telling me what you disagree with, and I'll be happy to argue with you right after Kraven the Hunter comes out and proves me exactly correct. Thank you so much for watching this video. Remember to like and subscribe and do all that other crap that YouTubers ask you to do. This has been Nick with Key Issues, and remember the motto, Madam Web, but specifically Sydney Sweeney over everything.